This plant replaces all fertilizers forever. Why did the industry prohibit it? Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Earthly Delights. Have you ever had that moment where you're standing over a pot of tired indoor herbs or looking across your backyard beds, and you can feel the soil is just worn out? The leaves look pale, growth slows down. You water, you prune, you give it sunlight, yet the plants still act like they're hungry. And then comes the familiar routine. Another trip to the store, another pricey bag of fertilizer, another promise on the label that this one will fix everything. But here's the secret most gardeners aren't told. Nature already built a fertilizer system long before factories existed. Not in a lab, not in a plastic bag, in living plants. In today's story, I'm going to show you two strange, almost unbelievable green machines. One is a deep-rooted plant that mines minerals from far below the surface, nutrients your topsoil can't reach anymore. The other is a tiny floating fern that partners with microbes to pull nitrogen straight out of the air, like it's turning sky into plant food. And both can break down fast enough to feed your soil while you watch the season change. So why aren't these plants everywhere? Why were they labeled dangerous, restricted, and quietly pushed aside while chemical fertilizer became the norm? If you're the kind of person who loves growing indoors and outdoors, who wants simple, practical methods, who's tired of guessing and wasting money, and who dreams of soil that gets richer every year, you're in exactly the right place. Now, let's dig into the mystery of Comfrey and Azolla. And if you want more real, soil-building strategies like this, make sure you subscribe to Earthly Delights so you don't miss the next part. Part 1. The illusion of modern agriculture. To understand why these miracle plants vanish from everyday gardening, we have to rewind the story back more than a century before shiny fertilizer bags and quick-fix powders became normal. Before the 1900s, farmers didn't have factories making nitrogen for them. They had to work with nature's rhythms. They rotated crops, composted what they had, used animal manure, and relied on living soil. Soil that could renew itself when it was treated like an ecosystem, not a container. Then the world changed with a breakthrough that felt like magic: the Haber-Bosch process. Scientists figured out how to pull nitrogen from the air and convert it into synthetic ammonia using intense heat and pressure. It was a triumph of chemistry, and it helped feed a rapidly growing population. On the surface, it looked like the final answer to hunger and poor harvests. But there was a hidden trade. Convenience replaced wisdom. Why spend time growing and managing green manures when you could feed an entire field in minutes with a scoop of bright blue pellets? Slowly, we built a system that depends on fossil fuels and constant inputs. And over time, many soils lost what made them powerful in the first place: their organic matter, their microbial life, their natural structure. The ground turned into a tired sponge that needed more and more chemicals just to perform the same job. And that's how we forgot the simplest truth. Nature has always been the ultimate fertilizer factory, and it runs for free. Meet the underground miner, Comfrey. Now, if modern agriculture is the illusion, Comfrey is the reminder, the living proof that the soil still has secret power when we work with it. Meet our first hero, Symphytum, better known as Comfrey. At first glance, it doesn't look like a miracle. It's just a big, leafy green plant, almost like a wild bush, with soft purple or pink bell-shaped flowers that sway in the breeze. Nothing flashy, nothing that screams revolution. But underground, Comfrey is something else entirely. Most of the plants we grow, your tomatoes, basil, lettuce, even many houseplants in containers, live close to the surface. Their roots explore only the top layers of soil, the same area that gets exhausted first. Comfrey doesn't play that game. It builds a thick, fleshy taproot that drives deep, 2-3 meters, and sometimes even close to 10 feet, down into the darker, cooler layers of the earth where few garden plants ever reach. And down there, Comfrey becomes a living nutrient pump. It pulls up minerals that rain, watering, and time have carried away from your topsoil. Valuable nutrients like potassium, calcium, and iron. Then it stores that buried treasure in its massive leaves. So when you cut those leaves and lay them on the soil, you're not just mulching, you're delivering deep earth nutrition straight back to the surface. It's like a natural elevator for minerals, one that works day and night, season after season, turning forgotten layers of soil into food for the life you're trying to grow. Part 3. The Aquatic Nitrogen Factory, Azolla. If Comfrey is the underground miner, then Azolla is the floating factory. Quiet, soft, almost invisible, until you realize what it's actually doing. While Comfrey rules the land, our second hero rules the water. Meet Azolla, often called the mosquito fern. It's tiny, free-floating, and when it spreads across a pond, it looks like a smooth carpet of green velvet, calm and harmless on the surface. But inside those miniature leaves is a partnership that feels like science fiction. Azolla lives in symbiosis with a cyanobacterium known as Anabaena azollai. They've been evolving together for millions of years, and together they perform a trick that industrial agriculture spends enormous fuel trying to copy. They capture nitrogen from the air and turn it into plant-usable fertility. Think about that for a second. While factories burn huge amounts of energy to make nitrogen fertilizer, Azolla does it with sunlight, water, and biology. No smokestacks, no pressure tanks, no chemical bags. And it doesn't just do it, it does it fast. Under the right conditions, Azolla can double its biomass in as little as 3 to 5 days, building fertility almost as if it's printing it. That's why ancient farmers, especially in places like China and Vietnam, treated Azolla like a treasure. They grew it in flooded rice paddies where it formed a thick mat, shading out weeds, protecting the water, and then breaking down into rich green manure. As it decomposed, it could release significant nitrogen back into the system, feeding the next growth cycle like a self-renewing engine. A living, repeatable source of nitrogen, floating right at the surface. Part 4. The numbers don't lie. By now, I know what some of you are thinking, especially if you've ever stood in the fertilizer aisle staring at those guaranteed analysis numbers. You're thinking, this sounds beautiful, but can a couple of plants really compete with chemical fertilizer? And this is where the story gets almost unfair, because once you look at the numbers, the argument stops being emotional and becomes obvious. Let's start with Comfrey. Its leaves are famously rich in potassium, and in dried form, Comfrey can contain around 8.43% potassium. That's a big deal for fruiting plants. If you grow tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, or anything that sets flowers and fruit, you already know potassium is the engine behind sweeter flavor, stronger blooms, and heavier harvests. But Comfrey doesn't stop there. Studies have also pointed out that Russian Comfrey can accumulate silicon, with reports around 513 parts per million. And silicon is one of those quiet nutrients that doesn't get the spotlight, yet it can strengthen cell walls, helping plants stand tougher against stress, pests, and disease. Now look at Azolla, and here's the real magic: speed. Azolla and Comfrey both break down incredibly fast compared to woody mulches, because they're low in lignin and heavy fiber. That means when you lay them down as green mulch, they don't sit there for months. A thick layer of Comfrey leaves can practically melt into the soil in about 48 hours, releasing its mineral cargo right where roots can actually use it, without long delays and without that frustrating nutrient lockup gardeners run into with slower materials. And when you put them together, you're not just feeding the plant, you're feeding the soil ecosystem with a balanced, living diet. Which brings us to the question that should feel impossible now. If these plants are this powerful, why aren't they everywhere? Part 5. The Comfrey Scare. Why was it banned? So where did Comfrey go? This is the part where the story gets tense, because Comfrey wasn't always that weird fertilizer plant. For centuries, it was a folk remedy. People nicknamed it knit bone, dried the leaves for tea, and fed it to animals, believing it could heal from the inside out. Then researchers focused on a group of compounds inside comfrey called pyrrolizidine alkaloids, PAs for short. The problem wasn't touching the plant or laying leaves on your soil. The concern was long-term internal use. Taken orally over time, certain PAs have been linked to liver injury, including a condition known as hepatic veno-occlusive disease. In 2001, U.S. regulators warned dietary supplement makers to stop selling comfrey products meant to be swallowed, and other countries tightened rules in similar ways. Headlines didn't say, "Avoid eating it." They screamed, "Toxic," and "banned," and that stigma spread fast. Garden centers dropped it. Nurseries stopped stocking it. A soil-building miracle got treated like a hazard sign. But here's the twist. Those warnings were about consumption, not about growing comfrey as mulch. In the soil, the leaves break down fast, feeding microbes and plants. Yet fear had already done its job for most gardeners. But 6. The invasive paradox, the Azolla restriction. Azolla, on the other hand, didn't get condemned for what it does to people. It got condemned for what it can do to ecosystems when it escapes control. And this is the paradox. Azolla's greatest gift is also its greatest threat. The same explosive growth that makes it a powerful nitrogen source can, in the wrong place, turn it into a green blanket of trouble. In regions where Azolla isn't native, parts of Europe, the UK, and places like Ontario and Canada, it has escaped into wild waterways. And once it's out there, it doesn't politely stay in a corner. It multiplies fast enough to carpet ponds, canals, and slow-moving rivers, forming a thick mat that blocks sunlight from reaching the water below. Native aquatic plants are shaded out and weakened. Oxygen levels can drop as the mat builds and decomposes, and that shift can create the kind of stressed, dead zones where fish and other aquatic life struggle to survive. Beyond the ecological damage, Azolla can become a practical nightmare too, clogging irrigation systems, pumps, and even water infrastructure that depends on clear flow. So governments stepped in, not because Azolla isn't useful, but because it can be too successful. In places like Ontario, it's treated as an invasive risk under invasive species regulations, meaning import, release, and propagation can be restricted or outright illegal. And just like that, a plant celebrated for generations in Asian rice paddies became, in parts of the West, a criminalized weed. Proof that context can turn a miracle into a menace. Part 7. The industry's silent victory. And this is where the story gets really interesting, because people always ask the same question. Did the fertilizer industry lobby to ban these plants? The honest answer is, they didn't need to. The system of the 20th century did the work for them, quietly, step by step, until the outcome looked inevitable. Think about how synthetic fertilizer works as a business. It's a perfect loop. You buy a bag, you spread it, much of it leaches or washes away, and next season you need another bag. That creates recurring demand. It ties growers, whether you're a backyard gardener or a farmer, to global supply chains, fossil fuels, and prices that rise and fall beyond your control. It's convenient, yes, but it also keeps you dependent. Comfrey and Azolla are the opposite of that model. They represent something far more disruptive than a natural product. They represent autonomy. Plant a comfrey patch once, and it can keep producing cuttings for years, sometimes decades, turning sunlight and deep soil minerals into free fertility. Establish Azolla in a controlled water system, and it multiplies again and again, generating nitrogen-rich biomass without needing a factory. And the most inconvenient truth of all? You can't patent a wild plant the way you can brand a bag of pellets. But there was a catch, and it wasn't chemistry, it was culture. Living fertility requires attention. You observe, you cut leaves, you scoop ferns, you manage balance. The industry offered something that felt modern: clean hands, predictable labels, less time, less sweat. Slowly, the work of partnering with nature was framed as old-fashioned, even primitive. And over time, the knowledge didn't just fade. It was buried under shiny plastic bags marked NPK, while the quiet, self-renewing systems were pushed to the margins. Part 8, Reclaiming Our Roots, Lessons for Today. And that's the best part of this whole story, because it doesn't end with fear, restriction, or lost knowledge. Here on Earthly Delights, we're about reclaiming what works, using it wisely, and building soil that gets better year after year. We're stepping into a time where sustainability isn't a trendy word. It's practical survival for anyone who wants healthy plants without endless spending. So how do we bring this power back into our gardens safely and intelligently? Start with Comfrey and keep it simple. The easiest approach is chop and drop. Plant Comfrey where it can work for you, under fruit trees, along the edge of a garden bed, or in a dedicated patch. Then, a few times each season, you cut the leaves and lay them right on the soil as mulch. Those leaves break down fast, feeding microbes and releasing minerals exactly where roots live. And if you want to keep it controlled, choose a sterile hybrid like Bocking 14, which doesn't set seed, so it won't turn into an unwanted wanderer. Now for Azolla, this one is all about responsibility. If it's legal and safe where you live, grow it only in contained systems. A tub, a small lined pond, even a kiddie pool. Scoop it out regularly and feed it to your compost. Because Azolla is nitrogen-rich and breaks down quickly, it can supercharge a compost pile, helping brown materials decompose faster and heating the pile naturally. But the rule is non-negotiable. Never release it into wild waterways. And when you bring these plants back, you're not just saving money, you're rebuilding the soil microbiome, adding organic matter, and breaking the cycle of chemical dependency. You're turning your garden into a living system again, one that produces fertility, resilience, and abundance in a way that actually feels joyful. The choice is yours. Nature has never charged us a dime for fertility. Long before fertilizer factories, before plastic bags in guaranteed numbers, the earth already knew how to feed itself, through deep roots reaching for hidden minerals, through microscopic partners pulling nitrogen out of the sky, and through the quiet miracle of decay turning waste into life again. The industry didn't have to ban these plants to win. In many ways, we simply allowed ourselves to forget. But knowledge is like a seed. Once you plant it in your mind, it only needs a little light to start growing. So here's the real question. What happens if you dedicate just one small corner of your garden to Comfrey? What happens if you stop treating soil like an empty sponge for chemicals and start treating it like the living ecosystem it truly is? Because once you see soil as alive, everything changes. The way you mulch, the way you compost, the way you plan for next season. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever used Comfrey or Azolla? What's your favorite natural way to build fertility? Compost, leaf mold, worm castings, green mulch? Drop your experience, questions, and tips in the comments so we can all learn together. If this story helped you, please give it a thumbs up, share it with a fellow gardener, and make sure you follow and subscribe for more soil-deep lessons right here on Earthly Delights. Until next time, keep your hands dirty and your garden wild with life.